So you want to own a school bus company. You buy the buses, you win the contract. Every morning the fleet rolls out, fills up with children, and delivers them to school. And every one of those runs is paid for by a government that has to get those kids to class. Buy the yellow buses, sign the district, and a public budget pays you to do it, year after year. Sounds simple. It isn't. Because your customer is a government, and a government does not behave like a customer. It behaves like a contract. And the contract decides almost everything before you ever turn a key. So what does one of these buses actually cost? Where does the money come from when the person paying you is the state? Why does the fleet you just bought sit dead in a lot for 2 months every summer and a few hours in the middle of every day? And why is the single thing that decides whether this business lives or dies not the bus and not the contract, but whether you can find one human being willing to drive it? Start with the bus, because it is not the thing you think it is. A school bus is a heavily regulated, purpose-built vehicle, and it comes in types. A common one, the flat-nosed Type C that most district routes run, costs somewhere between $100,000 and $130,000 new in the current bidding cycles, and a plain 72-passenger version without special equipment sits nearer $100,000. Go up to the bigger transit-style Type D, and you are past $150,000. And then there is the electric bus, which is a completely different number. A new electric school bus from the major manufacturers lists at $350,000 to $400,000, 3 to 4 times the diesel. Hold that gap. It matters later because somebody else has been paying it for you. New bus prices have jumped hard. One large operator recently reported the price of a new full-size bus rising by around 40%. So most first fleets are not new. A used diesel bus can be had for a tiny fraction of a new one, sometimes $25,000, and the used market is where most small operators actually live. Here is the part that matters more than any of those prices. That bus is not the hard part of this business. It is the easy part. Because a school bus, unlike almost any other vehicle in this series, has almost no value on its own. Nobody wants a 40-foot yellow bus for anything except carrying school children. Its entire worth comes from one thing pointing at it: a contract, which means there are 2 doors into this business. Door 1. You buy an existing operator that already holds contracts with the buses, the yard, the drivers, and the district relationships already in place. You are not really buying buses. You are buying a book of government contracts, and the buses come along for the ride. Door 2. You start from nothing and you bid. You buy or lease the iron, you build the operation, and you go into a competitive tender against operators who have run those routes for decades. Cheaper to enter, brutally hard to win that first contract, because a district handing over the safety of its children does not gamble on a name it has never heard of. Same yellow bus. 2 completely different companies. How does one of these change hands? Almost always quietly, and almost always through the contracts, not the buses. A family operator with a district relationship going back 40 years retires with nobody to hand it to, and a larger contractor buys the routes and the yard. Consolidation has been steady, the big names swallowing the small ones. Because in this business, the asset that matters is not the fleet. It is the relationship with the district that keeps renewing. So the buses are bought and the contract is signed. Here is everything that arrives with it. First, the contract itself, and you did not write it. The district or the government sets the term, usually several years, sets the routes, sets the standards, and critically, sets a limit on how much your price can rise each year. Those increases are frequently capped in the original bid. You are locking in a price to a public body for years, and the public body wrote the terms. Second, the regulation, which is the strictest of any vehicle on the road. Your driver cannot just hold a license. They need a commercial license with a passenger endorsement and a specific school bus endorsement, a full background check, ongoing drug and alcohol testing, and continuous training. The vehicles face mandated inspections on a schedule tighter than almost anything in transport. You are not running a fleet. You are running the most heavily supervised operation on the highway, and every layer of that supervision is a cost. Third, the insurance and the liability, because your cargo is children. There is no more sensitive freight in existence, and the insurance that covers it and the standard of care demanded around it sits on top of everything else you carry, fixed and heavy and non-negotiable. Fourth, and this is the one that breaks operators, you inherit a labor shortage you cannot buy your way out of. This country is running roughly 21,000 fewer school bus drivers than it had before the pandemic, a drop of nearly 10%, and the gap has barely closed. A bus with no driver is a route you cannot run, and a route you cannot run is a contract you are now in breach of. You did not just buy buses. You bought a permanent hunt for the people to drive them. Now the money. How it actually comes in. Number 1, the base contract. This is the floor and the core. You are paid to run home-to-school routes, usually as a rate per bus per day or per route by the district. Steady, predictable, and paid by a government that does not go out of business. It is the most reliable revenue in this entire channel, and it is also the most capped. Number 2, special needs transport. Children with disabilities are entitled to transportation, often in smaller vehicles, sometimes with an aide on board, sometimes with wheelchair lifts and door-to-door service. It is more complex, more regulated, and it pays a significantly higher rate per vehicle than a standard route. For a lot of contractors, this is the most profitable work they do, and special needs work is sticky, in a way base routes are not. Once you have the wheelchair-equipped vehicles, the trained aides, and the individual routing for a child who needs door-to-door service, a district does not lightly move that contract to somebody else, because the cost of getting it wrong is a vulnerable student stranded. Higher rate, higher complexity, and far harder for a competitor to undercut. Number 3, charters and activity trips, field trips, sports teams to away games, band competitions. The bus you already own, sitting idle in the middle of the day and on weekends. Going out and earning on top of the base contract. This is the revenue that uses the dead time, and the operators who chase it hard are the ones who turn a thin margin into a real one. Number 4, and this one is unusual, government capital. For the past few years, the federal Clean School Bus Program put $5 billion on the table to replace old diesel buses with electric ones, and it paid enormous rebates, up to around $375,000 per bus for priority districts. Nearly $3 billion of it was awarded for about 8,500 buses, the overwhelming majority electric. For a while, the government was handing out most of the cost of a $400,000 bus. Note the past tense. That program was halted in early 2026 for review, which is exactly the risk of building your capital plan on a public subsidy. Number 5, advertising and ancillary work. Some states allow advertising on the side of the bus. Some operators run municipal and shuttle contracts alongside the schoolwork to fill the fleet. Small money next to the base contract, but it uses iron that would otherwise sit still. One more cost hides in plain sight, and it is the yard itself. A school bus fleet needs somewhere to park, fuel, wash, and service every one of those buses. And that yard is a fixed piece of real estate, carrying property costs 12 months a year for a fleet that works about 6. In a dense area, the land under the buses can quietly become one of the larger line items in the whole operation. Now, the number that makes this business stranger than it looks. You own the bus for 365 days a year. It runs on about 180 of them. An American school year is roughly 180 days. All the rest, the summer, the holidays, the weekends, the bus sits in your lot, insured, financed, depreciating, and earning nothing. And on the days it does run, look closer. It goes out for a couple of hours in the morning, comes back, sits through the entire middle of the day, and goes out again for a couple of hours in the afternoon. That is the shape of the work. Listen to that again. The single most expensive asset you own works a few hours a day on roughly half the days of the year. and sleeps the rest. You bought a fleet that is idle more than it moves. Every other vehicle in this channel is trying to run as many hours as physics allows. The trucker chases miles. The railroad chases carloads.
The armored truck chases stops.
The school bus is legally and structurally forbidden from doing the one thing that makes a vehicle pay, which is running constantly. Its whole calendar is capped by a school bell. Open the ledger and watch where the money goes. Start with the driver, because this is the largest line and the hardest one. Driver wages and benefits dominate the cost of a school bus operation, and you are bidding for those drivers in the middle of a national shortage, which means the price only goes one way. Every operator in your area is fishing the same shrinking pond, and the split shift nature of the work, a few hours in the morning and a few in the afternoon, with a long unpaid gap between, makes the job hard to fill at almost any wage. And you often pay for a full team of drivers to work a schedule that only needs them at the two ends of the day. A driver who wants 40 hours cannot get them from a route that runs 3 hours each morning and afternoon. So either you pay more to hold them for part-time work, or you lose them to an employer who can offer a full day. The split shift is not a scheduling detail. It is a structural reason the wage bill runs high.
Then, fuel. A diesel bus burns real money per mile,
And districts have reported diesel costs running well over budget, 6 to 20% above plan in bad years. And here is the sting. Your contract capped how much your price can rise. Diesel did not agree to any cap. Then maintenance. A school bus in service runs $5,000 to $10,000 a year in upkeep under normal use, and these are vehicles held to an inspection standard that does not tolerate deferral. Then the yard, the fuel island, the mechanics, the dispatchers, the routing staff, and the software that builds and tracks every route. Then the bus payment or the depreciation on the iron itself. And then the invisible ones, the empty summer. 2 months a year where the asset carries every cost and earns nothing at all. A dead weight built into the calendar. The empty middle of the day. The hours between the morning and afternoon runs when your buses and often your drivers are idle. The driver you trained who left. You pay to license and train a driver. And in a shortage, a trained school bus driver is exactly who a delivery company or a transit agency wants to hire away. And the cap. Every time your costs rise faster than your contracted price is allowed to, the difference does not go to the district. It comes out of you. Now the mechanism underneath all of it, and it is a trap with 2 jaws. First jaw. You signed a fixed price to a government, but you run a variable cost business. Your contract locked in what you can charge for years, but your 2 biggest costs, the driver and the diesel, move every single year, and neither one cares what you signed. When wages spike in a shortage or fuel jumps, you cannot pass it through. You quoted a government a fixed number for a service whose costs float, and the gap between them is your problem and nobody else's. Second jaw. You only get paid for the days the fleet runs, but you pay for the fleet every day. The bus costs the same to own whether it works 180 days or 365. The insurance, the financing, the depreciation, the yard, all of it runs 12 months a year. The revenue runs about 6. It is the same density law that governs the trucking company and the railroad, except here, the thing capping your utilization is not the market. It is the calendar of a school year you do not control. So how did any of this come to exist? Why is there a standardized yellow bus at all, run by private contractors under government terms? For that, go back to a professor and a problem in 1937. His name was Frank Sear, and he taught rural education at Teachers College, Columbia University. He had started studying how American children actually got to school, and what he found was chaos. Children were riding to school in trucks, in horse-drawn wagons, in vehicles painted every color imaginable. One district, hoping to instill patriotism, painted its buses red, white, and blue. In Kansas, a district was hauling children to school in horse-drawn wheat wagons. There was no standard for how a school bus was built. how strong it was, or what color it was, and the manufacturers were begging for one. So, in April of 1939, with a $5,000 grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, Sear organized a conference at Teachers College. He brought in transportation officials from all 48 states, plus the bus manufacturers, plus paint specialists. They sat in one room for 7 days. They came out with 44 national standards for how a school bus should be built. Body length, ceiling height, aisle width, and the one that outlived all the others, the color. They hung strips of different shades on the wall and settled on a specific yellow, chosen because black lettering on it was easiest to read in the half-light of early morning and late afternoon. They called it National School Bus Chrome. Sear himself always thought it looked more orange than yellow. Almost every one of those 44 standards has been revised since. But the yellow never changed. And here is why it matters to you as an owner. That standardization is the thing that made this a business at all. Once every bus was built to the same spec and painted the same color, a school bus became an interchangeable, biddable, contractable unit. A district could write a tender for a thing everyone understood. That yellow bus was designed for the safety of children. What it accidentally created was a market. Now the cautionary tale. Not a small operator. The second largest school bus contractor in North America. The company ran under the National Express name in the United States through brands like Durham School Services. It had been in student transportation for over 100 years. It operated more than 14,000 school buses. By any measure, it was a giant, one of the two biggest names in the entire industry. And its own parent company decided it wanted out. Its parent, a large British transport group, announced back in 2023 that it was looking to sell the whole North American school bus business. That reason was blunt. That division had weighed heavily on the group's earnings since the pandemic, crushed by driver shortages and wage inflation, the exact two jaws we just described. In April of 2025, the sale was agreed to an infrastructure investment firm for an enterprise value of up to $608 million. Now look at why that number tells the whole story. That business, with more than 14,000 buses, was expected to produce an adjusted operating profit of about $11.5 million for the year. Run that division, more than 14,000 school buses, over 100 years of operation, one of the two largest operators on the continent. About $11.5 million of operating profit. That is a little over $800 per bus per year. And when the sale price came in lower than investors had hoped, the parent company's own shares fell more than 35% in a single day. Sit with the shape of that. This was not a robbery, and it was not a competitor stealing the market. It was the second biggest operator in North America, a century old, unable to make the arithmetic work, whose owner paid in a collapsed share price just to hand the whole thing to somebody else. Buses were fine, contracts were real. Only the margin was a ghost. So who makes this work, and how? First, they win on density, exactly like every fleet in this channel. Tight routes, a full yard, the maximum number of children moved per bus per driver per mile. A packed, contiguous contract beats a scattered one every time. Second, they chase the high-value work and they fill the dead time. Special needs transport that pays a premium. Charters and sports and field trips that put the idle midday and weekend buses to work. That base contract keeps the lights on. Everything above it is where the actual margin lives, and it comes from using the hours the calendar tries to waste. Third, they take the government's capital while it is offered. When the public purse is paying most of the cost of a new bus, the operators who move fast re-equip their fleet on somebody else's money. But they never bet the company on it because a subsidy is a political decision, and political decisions get halted, as that clean bus money just was. Fourth, they treat the driver as the entire business, because they are. The operators who survive build real pay, real benefits, and schedules that make a split shift livable. They recruit retirees and parents whose hours match the school day. In a business where a missing driver is a breached contract, the human being behind the wheel is not a cost line. They are the constraint the whole company is built around. Fifth, they bid with discipline. They never sign a multi-year fixed price to a government without escalators for fuel and wages built in, because a contract that cannot move while your costs do is not a contract. It is a slow loss with a signature on it. And they watch the calendar the way a hotel watches occupancy. Every idle summer week, every empty midday hour is capacity they have already paid for and are giving away for free. The operators who thrive find something to do with it. Summer camps, municipal shuttles, charter work. Anything that puts a paid body in a seat the school year leaves empty. So does it work? Take the good version. A disciplined local contractor, tight routes, a solid special needs book, a busy charter operation filling the midday and the weekends, government grants renewing the fleet, and a fully solved driver pipeline. That is a stable, sticky, recession-proof business.
Children go to school, whether the economy is booming or crashing,
and the government check clears either way. Run well, at the right size, it is one of the most durable small businesses in transport. Now, the bad version. And it is not the little operator. It is the giant. More than 14,000 buses and $11.5 million of profit. A parent so eager to leave that its stock fell by a third the day it found the exit. If scale like that could not make the margin comfortable, then a small operator has to be very clear about what it is holding. You can absolutely run a profitable school bus company, but you are running a fixed-price contract for a government whose budget is set by politics, in a permanent driver shortage, on a fleet that sleeps all summer. Which brings it back to what you are actually buying. You are not buying a fleet of buses. Anyone can buy buses. You are selling a government a fixed price, years in advance, for a service delivered by a person who is the hardest thing in the entire business to find, using a machine that is idle more than it moves. Your product was never transport. Your product was a promise, made to a public body at a number you were not allowed to change. The yellow bus is the safest, most standardized, most carefully regulated vehicle on the road. Frank Cyr and a room full of officials spent 7 days making sure of it. They built it to carry children through the half-light of an early morning. And it does that better than any vehicle ever made. Nobody in that room was trying to build you a good business. They were trying to get the children to school. And the margin was never the point. And to this day, it shows.